The soldier had marched this trail 100 times, boots sinking into the same mud, rifle heavy against his shoulder. Tonight was no different, or so he thought. The forest was still, broken only by the drip of water falling from leaves after the rain. His flashlight swept lazily across the ground until it froze on something that shouldn't have been there. Just inches from his boot, pressed deep into the wet earth, was the outline of a child's hand. Small, fresh, and facing upward, as if the child had reached out in desperation before vanishing into the dark. The soldier froze, the beam of his flashlight steady on the small handprint embedded in the mud. The rest of the forest faded into silence, his ears suddenly ringing with the sound of his own heartbeat. He had seen countless prints before, boot treads, deer tracks, even the occasional stray dog's paw. But this was different. This was unmistakably human, and unmistakably small. He crouched down, boots sinking into the soft earth, and studied it closer. The impression was fresh. The edges hadn't crumbled or filled with water. Drops of rain still glistened along its shallow ridges, proving it couldn't have been there more than an hour or two. He shifted his flashlight, angling it across the forest floor. There were no adult footprints nearby. No boots. No shoes. Just that one fragile hand pressed flat into the earth, as though whoever it belonged to had stumbled, caught themselves, then kept going. His throat tightened. This wasn't the sort of trail he expected to find in this part of the woods. The soldier was trained to scan, to notice details others overlooked. He widened his circle, sweeping the beam of light across damp leaves and patches of mud. A few feet ahead, another faint impression. This time, it was the partial outline of small toes. Barefoot. He followed the trail a little further and found a scuffed line where something had dragged, perhaps a knee, or a small body too weak to stand upright. His jaw clenched. A child had come through here, and recently. Alone. He rose slowly, scanning the dark trees. The forest was thick with pine and birch, their trunks pale and ghostly under the thin wash of moonlight. Mist drifted low, curling between branches, swallowing the edges of his vision. Every sound felt amplified, the drip of water from leaves, the crackle of distant brush, even his own steady breathing. His hand instinctively rested on the rifle slung over his shoulder, but this wasn't about defense. This was about urgency. Somewhere out there, a child was moving through this forest, barefoot, in the cold night air. He knew what that meant: exposure, exhaustion, fear. It wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. He clicked his radio. Static hissed before a voice came through. Patrol status? The soldier hesitated for only a moment before answering. I've got signs. Possible child. Recent. Requesting immediate support along the East Ridge Trail. There was a pause on the other end, disbelief clear even in static. A child? Out there? Confirmed, the soldier replied firmly. Handprint in the mud. Fresh. The channel went quiet, then crackled again. Copy. Sending team to your location. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Too long. If a child was stumbling through these woods barefoot, 20 minutes could mean the difference between finding them alive or not finding them at all. The soldier knew he couldn't wait. He lowered the radio and crouched again, flashlight sweeping. The next handprint was further along, smaller, shakier, as though the child had been slowing down. His gut twisted. Whoever this was, they weren't just lost. They were struggling. The soldier moved forward carefully, boots avoiding the delicate impressions. He tracked slowly, deliberately, noting every disturbed leaf and bent blade of grass. The trail curved off the main path, deeper into the underbrush where branches grew low and tangled. He pushed through, branches scraping against his jacket, mud clinging to his trousers. After a few minutes, he found another mark. This one wasn't a hand or foot. It was a streak of dirt smeared along a fallen log, as though someone had dragged themselves across it. His light followed the smear down the other side, where another partial handprint waited, fingers trembling in the mud. The soldier swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. He whispered under his breath, a habit from years of patrols, "You're close. Hold on." The deeper he went, the heavier the air felt. The mist clung thicker here, curling against his legs, turning every step into a shadowed blur. He stopped occasionally, lifting his head to listen. The forest was silent, too silent. No wind rustling branches, no nocturnal animals scurrying in the dark. Just stillness, oppressive and heavy. And then he heard it. Faint. Fragile. A sound barely more than the whisper of a leaf brushing the ground. A sob. The soldier froze, every muscle tense. He angled his flashlight forward, sweeping slowly, carefully. His heart thudded against his ribs. Again, the sound came, a whimper, soft and broken, somewhere just ahead. "Hello," his voice called softly, controlled but gentle. "It's all right. You're safe now. Don't be afraid." The whimper silenced instantly. Whoever it was had heard him, and gone still. The soldier stepped forward slowly, keeping his light low, trying not to blind whoever hid ahead. He knelt, letting the beam skim the ground until it caught something small pressed against the base of a tree trunk. A figure. Curled tightly. Thin arms wrapped around knees. Mud streaked across pale skin. A child. The soldier's breath caught. The small figure trembled violently, head buried into arms. The child's bare feet were coated in mud, skin raw and scraped. The hand pressed against the tree matched perfectly with the print he had first found. He lowered his rifle, letting it hang loose on its strap, and spoke softly again. "It's all right. You don't have to hide anymore. I see you." The child didn't move, but the trembling grew harder, shallow breaths ragged in the silence. The soldier could see every rise and fall of the small shoulders, every twitch of fingers digging into the dirt. He crouched lower, setting his flashlight on the ground so it cast a softer glow instead of a harsh beam. "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued gently. "I'm here to take you home." The child lifted their head slightly. Just enough for the soldier to see a flash of wide, terrified eyes glinting in the light. And then, with a voice no louder than a whisper, the child said words that froze him colder than the forest air. "Don't let him find me." The soldier's breath caught when he heard the words. The forest felt colder, the silence heavier. "Don't let him find me." Those weren't the words of a lost child, they were the words of someone who was hiding, someone who had already seen danger far too close. He stayed crouched, his flashlight dimmed to a soft halo on the ground. He didn't want to overwhelm the child. Every instinct told him that sudden movement or harsh light would only send the small figure deeper into fear. He'd seen it before, in war zones, in refugee camps, in villages scarred by conflict. Fear this raw had a way of making children shrink into shadows. "It's just me," he said softly, his voice steady, low. He unclipped his gloves, tugging them off slowly to show his hands were empty. He extended one forward, palm up, fingers open. No weapons. "See? Just hands." The child blinked, eyes glinting in the dim light. They didn't move closer, but they didn't hide their face again either. A fragile step. The soldier's training and instinct both told him not to press too fast. He lowered his voice further, steady and calm. "My name's Daniel," he said, choosing to give a name rather than a title. Soldier could sound harsh. "I'm here to help. You don't have to tell me yours yet. Not if you don't want to. But I need you to know, you're safe with me." The child's lips trembled, mud crusted around the corners of their mouth. Their whisper cracked the silence again. He said, "If I made noise, he'd..." The words trailed off, choked by a sob. Daniel's heart clenched. He didn't ask who he was, not yet. The child wasn't ready, and pressing for answers too soon could shut them down. Instead, he shifted slightly, settling onto one knee, lowering himself to the child's level. "You don't have to be afraid of him anymore," he said, steady as a vow. "He's not here. I won't let anyone hurt you." The child's eyes darted around the trees, pupils wide in the dim glow. "He looks for me," the whisper came again. "At night. He'll hear." Daniel swallowed. Whoever this he was, the fear was real enough to keep a child shivering in the forest after dark. He adjusted his radio, lowering the volume so static wouldn't spook them. Quietly, he clicked it once, signaling his position again to the incoming team. He didn't give details, not yet. If the child's warning was true, loud transmissions might carry. "All right," he said softly. "We'll keep quiet. Just you and me." He glanced at the small handprint pressed against the tree trunk. It was trembling still, the child's thin fingers curling into bark as if holding on for life itself. He took another slow step forward, his boots sinking quietly into the mud. The child didn't back away, but their breathing grew quicker, shallow gasps like a trapped bird. He stopped, raising both hands now, palms out. "No closer. Not unless you say." The forest pressed silent around them. Every drip of water from the leaves seemed to echo. Then, slowly, the child nodded once. A tiny gesture, barely visible, but permission nonetheless. Daniel moved closer on his knees until he was just an arm's length away. He set his rifle carefully against the ground, making sure the barrel pointed away. Then, from the pouch on his vest, he pulled a small packet of water. He tore it open and placed it gently on the ground between them. "Here. It's clean. You don't have to drink it now, but it's yours." The child's eyes flicked to the packet, then back to his face. Hunger and thirst battled with fear. After a moment, a small, dirty hand darted out, snatching the packet before retreating quickly against their chest. They clutched it, trembling, as though afraid he'd take it back. Daniel forced his expression to stay calm, steady, though inside his chest burned. "Good," he murmured. "That's for you. No one will take it." The child looked down, tearing the corner with their teeth, gulping at the water desperately. Drops spilled down their chin, mixing with mud. When the packet was empty, they lowered it slowly, their eyes searching his face again, still wary but softened by relief. Daniel leaned back slightly, giving them space. "See? We can take it one step at a time." A faint sound cut through the silence then, a twig snapping somewhere deeper in the woods. The child's entire body jerked, eyes wide, hands gripping their knees tightly. Panic flared instantly in their gaze. Daniel's instincts lit up. He slid his hand toward his rifle but kept his movements slow, controlled. He angled his head, listening. The forest grew still again, but the child shook violently, whispering hoarsely, "It's him. He's looking." Daniel's pulse hammered. Whoever he was, the child's terror wasn't imagined. He leaned closer, voice a steady whisper. "Listen to me. I won't let him get to you. But you have to trust me. We need to move from here." The child whimpered, shaking their head. "If I move, he'll hear." Daniel exhaled slowly, grounding himself. He placed his hand gently on the dirt between them. "Then I'll carry you. You don't have to take a step. Just hold on to me. I'll do the rest." The child blinked, lips trembling. For a long moment, they didn't respond. Then, slowly, they lifted one small, mud-streaked hand and placed it against his outstretched palm. It was light, fragile, trembling with fear, but it was also trust. Daniel closed his fingers carefully around theirs. His voice was soft but resolute. "Good. We're getting you out." He eased the child into his arms, lifting their thin frame carefully against his chest. The small figure clung tightly, face burying against his uniform. Their breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, but they didn't resist. The soldier rose slowly, flashlight beam catching the line of handprints behind them, a trail of fear now ending in his arms. He tightened his hold, adjusting his rifle strap, every sense alert. Behind him, the forest creaked. Another faint snap. Another reminder, they weren't alone out here. He pressed his radio close, whispering into it, "Child recovered. Not alone in the woods. Suspect possible. Moving west toward rendezvous." The static hissed back. "Copy. Team converging. Hold steady." But Daniel knew there was no holding steady in this moment. With the child clinging to him, whispering brokenly, "Don't let him find me," he set his jaw and pushed forward through the mist. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. Daniel adjusted the weight of the child in his arms, his boots sinking into the soft mud with every step. The forest stretched endless around him, cloaked in mist, every trunk and shadow blending into the next. His flashlight beam cut narrow arcs across the ground, catching glimpses of broken branches, muddy patches, and the faint reflection of water pooling in low spots after the rain. The child clung tightly to his vest, small hands gripping the fabric with surprising strength. Their face was buried against his chest, each shaky breath vibrating against him. Daniel could feel the child's heartbeat thudding fast and shallow, as if every step deeper into the woods only made the terror grow stronger. He kept his pace steady, deliberate. Moving too fast would risk noise, moving too slow would risk losing ground if someone was trailing them. He listened with every step, ears tuned for the faintest sound, the crunch of twigs, the rustle of brush, anything out of place. "Easy now," he murmured to the child, his voice low and calm. "You're safe with me. I've got you." But even as he said it, his eyes swept the shadows. He didn't like the way the forest pressed in, muffling sound, swallowing light. There was no breeze, no animals stirring. Just silence, the kind of silence that carried weight. The child whispered suddenly, voice muffled against his chest. "He knows these woods." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Who is he?" he asked gently, careful not to sound demanding. The child shook their head violently, clinging tighter. "He'll hear if I say." A chill spread down Daniel's spine. Whether it was fear or belief, the child's terror was absolute. He adjusted his grip, shielding them closer against him. "All right. You don't have to say anything. Just hold on." He pressed his radio again, lowering his voice. "Unit 1 to command. I've got the child with me. Advancing west along ridge. No visual on suspect, but child indicates not alone. ETA to rendezvous, 10 minutes. Static crackled, followed by the dispatcher's steady tone. "Copy, Unit 1. Team en route to intercept. Hold your course." Daniel clicked once in acknowledgement, then shifted his focus back to the trail. The prints he had been following earlier were gone now, swallowed by the undergrowth. But he didn't need them anymore, he had the child in his arms. His job now was to get them both out alive. Then he heard it again. A snap. Sharp. Behind him this time. He stopped instantly, his flashlight beam freezing on the ground ahead. His ears strained, heart thudding hard against his ribs. The child stiffened, their tiny fingers digging painfully into his vest. "He's here," they whispered, voice shaking. Daniel turned slowly, angling the beam behind them. The mist shifted, curling thick between the trees, obscuring distance. His eyes narrowed. There, a shape, faint, moving between trunks. Too tall for an animal. Too heavy. His hand slid instinctively to his rifle, loosening it from its strap. He didn't aim, not yet. He just let the weight settle into his hands, ready. "Stay quiet," he whispered to the child. The figure didn't emerge. It stayed in the mist, hovering at the edge of visibility. Daniel's gut told him it wasn't coincidence. Whoever it was, they knew he had the child. The K9 unit would have been invaluable here, he thought bitterly. A nose that could track, a bark that could deter. But tonight, he was alone. He adjusted the child's weight again, speaking softly to keep them calm. "We're going to keep moving. Eyes forward." He turned back toward the trail, forcing his steps steady. His boots sank deeper now, mud clinging heavy, but he pressed on. Every few seconds, he glanced back, catching the faint shape still lingering. Always in the mist, never closing the distance. Watching. The child whimpered. He waits. He waits until it's dark enough. Daniel swallowed, forcing calm into his tone. "Then we'll reach the lights before he does." He knew the rendezvous wasn't far. Beyond the ridge, a clearing stretched wide enough for trucks to park, for floodlights to be set up once backup arrived. All he had to do was get there. Minutes stretched long. Each step felt louder, each breath sharper. His flashlight beam flicked across broken branches, then something caught his eye, fresh mud streaked high against a tree trunk, as if a hand had dragged along it. Larger than a child's. Adult-sized. His pulse hammered. The figure wasn't just following. It had been here before him. He picked up his pace, careful but faster now, each step calculated. The child clung tighter, their face pressed so firmly into his chest he could feel the tremors of silent sobs. "Almost there," he murmured. "Stay with me." At last, the trees thinned. The ridge sloped downward, and through the mist he saw faint beams, headlights cutting into the fog from the clearing ahead. Relief surged through him, though he kept it contained. They weren't safe yet. Not until the child was in those trucks. He pressed the radio again. Visual on convoy. Coming in from East Ridge. Open path. The reply was immediate. "We see you." Lights on. The beams grew brighter as vehicles shifted, searchlights angling to cut through the fog. Shadows retreated, the forest glowing faintly under the artificial glare. Daniel's boots hit firmer ground. He descended the ridge quickly, cradling the child, every muscle burning but refusing to stop. The clearing opened wide, men moving toward him, voices calling. Then, behind him, a sound split the air. A whistle. Low. Piercing. The child screamed, clutching Daniel's neck with all their strength. "It's him." Daniel spun, rifle raised, flashlight beams slashing across the treeline. The mist rippled, but the figure was gone. Only the whistle's echo remained, fading into the roar of the trucks. The sergeant of the arriving team ran toward him, eyes wide as he saw the child in Daniel's arms. "Get them inside." Daniel nodded, sprinting the last stretch. He lifted the child into waiting hands, volunteers wrapping them in blankets, medics moving quickly. The child's cries softened once they were inside the truck, surrounded by warmth and safety. But Daniel didn't climb in. He stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle steady, eyes locked on the treeline. The whistle still rang in his ears, a promise more than a sound. Whoever had been following wasn't finished. He muttered under his breath, a vow only he could hear. "You won't take them back." And somewhere deep in the mist, the forest remained silent, waiting for night to fall again. The floodlights from the trucks blasted through the mist, casting sharp beams that turned the clearing into an island of harsh, sterile brightness. For the first time all night, Daniel felt the weight lift slightly off his shoulders. He had brought the child into the light. He had done what mattered most. But even as medics swarmed around the small figure, wrapping them in blankets, checking vitals, Daniel's eyes never left the treeline. That whistle. The way it had cut through the forest, deliberate, piercing, it wasn't random. It was a signal. A warning, maybe even a challenge. Whoever was out there wanted him to know they weren't finished. "Soldier," a voice broke his concentration. The sergeant in charge of the convoy had stepped up beside him, his brow furrowed. "You said the kid wasn't alone?" Daniel nodded, jaw tight. Handprints in the mud. Signs of struggle. And the child whispered about someone, he. Then that whistle, just before we cleared the ridge. The sergeant's eyes hardened. "We'll sweep it. Teams are forming now. But you," he gestured at Daniel's mud-caked uniform, his ragged breathing. "You've done your part. Let the rest of us take it." Daniel didn't move. His rifle hung ready at his side, eyes still locked on the trees. If he's still out there, he's not running. He's hunting. That wasn't a warning for you. It was for me. The sergeant studied him a moment, then nodded curtly. "Fine. You stay on perimeter with me. But no heroics." Daniel exhaled, adjusting his grip on the rifle. "No promises." The child, now seated in the back of a truck, had calmed slightly under the medic's care, though their eyes remained wide, darting toward the forest whenever a branch snapped or a radio hissed. They clutched the blanket tightly, lips moving silently as if repeating the same words over and over. Daniel stepped closer, crouching at the open door. "You're safe here," he told them gently. "Stay with these people. They won't let anything happen to you." The child blinked at him, their voice hoarse but insistent. "Don't go back. He waits in the dark." Daniel forced a reassuring smile, though inside, his gut twisted. "Then I'll be the one waiting for him." The sergeant barked orders, men fanning out in formation, their flashlights cutting through mist, radios crackling with updates as they swept the treeline. The air was thick with tension, every man moving with the knowledge that someone dangerous still lurked nearby. Daniel took his post at the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning, rifle raised. His ears strained for sound beyond the static of radios and the crunch of boots. For a long stretch, there was nothing, no whistle, no movement. Just silence. Then, faintly, from the east side of the ridge, came the sound of water disturbed. Not the steady roar of the river, but a splash. Quick. Deliberate. Movement by the river, a deputy called out over the radio. Requesting spotlight. Beams swung instantly, searchlights cutting through the mist to sweep the shoreline. The water shimmered silver, waves lapping against the mud. At first, nothing. Then, a figure bolting from the bank, crashing back into the trees. Visual confirmed, another shouted. Suspect on foot. Daniel didn't think. He moved. Boots pounded mud, rifle tight in his grip, eyes locked on the shadow weaving through trunks ahead. The suspect was fast, slipping between beams of light, using the mist as cover. The team surged behind him, flashlights sweeping frantically. Orders shouted, radios crackled, but Daniel's focus narrowed to the rhythm of his steps and the shadow just beyond reach. The child's whisper echoed in his mind. He knows these woods. The figure darted right, then vanished behind a slope. Daniel skidded to a halt, heart pounding, listening. The forest was silent again. No footsteps, no movement. Just the hiss of mist curling around him. He raised his fist, signaling the others to stop. He's circling, he said quietly. He wants us spread thin. The sergeant's voice crackled over the radio. Hold your ground. Don't chase blind. Daniel exhaled slowly, rifle sweeping the shadows. He knew the tactic. This wasn't random panic. Whoever this was, they knew how to manipulate fear, how to move unseen. Then, suddenly, another sound, not from the trees ahead, but behind them. A sharp crack of a branch. Daniel spun, flashlight beam catching only mist. His chest tightened. The man wasn't running from them. He was doubling back. Truck, he barked into his radio, sprinting toward the clearing. "He's going for the child." The words hit like a thunderclap. The men surged, running back toward the lights. The trucks loomed through the fog, floodlights still blazing. Daniel's boots pounded the ground as he closed the distance, lungs burning. From the edge of the clearing, he saw movement, a dark shape slipping between beams, too close to the vehicles. Medics shouted in alarm, scrambling to shield the child. Daniel raised his rifle, breath steady, finger tightening on the trigger. But the suspect moved like smoke, weaving through the chaos. He couldn't fire, not with the child so close. Instead, he charged. His body slammed into the figure just as it reached the truck, both of them crashing into the mud. The rifle skittered from his grip, sliding across the dirt. The man twisted violently, stronger than Daniel expected, his fists striking, teeth bared in a snarl. For a moment, the world blurred, grunts, mud, fists, the flash of knives glinting in the floodlights. Daniel gritted his teeth, grappling, refusing to let go even as pain lanced through his side. "Get him off the truck," the sergeant roared. Hands grabbed, men piling in. The suspect thrashed like a wild animal, his strength terrifying, but numbers overwhelmed him. He was dragged back, pinned to the ground, arms wrenched behind him. Daniel scrambled to his knees, gasping, eyes darting immediately to the truck. The child was still inside, clutching their blanket, eyes wide with terror but unhurt. Their small hand pressed to the glass, shaking, as if checking to see if he was still there. Daniel pressed a mud-streaked hand to the window briefly, nodding once. "You're all right. He didn't take you." The suspect roared from the ground, voice ragged but full of hate. "This isn't over. There are more of us." The men secured restraints, hauling him upright. His hood slipped back, revealing gaunt cheeks, hollow eyes that burned with something feral. Daniel picked up his rifle, mud caked to his uniform, chest heaving. His gaze stayed locked on the man as he was dragged away. "It ends with you tonight," he muttered, though deep inside, he knew it wasn't the whole truth. Because if the child's words were right, and if this man wasn't alone, then the whistle in the woods was only the beginning. The clearing was chaos. Radios squawked, men shouted positions, and the hooded man, mud-streaked, restrained, but still thrashing, was dragged toward one of the waiting vehicles. His curses echoed in the night, guttural, half-garbled, but laced with fury. "You think you saved them? You don't know what's out here. You don't know." Daniel stood apart, chest heaving, mud caked across his arms and face. His side ached where the suspect's knife had grazed him, though the cut was shallow. Adrenaline kept the pain muted, but his body screamed with exhaustion. He didn't notice it much, his eyes were fixed on the child inside the truck. The small face was still pressed against the window, blanket drawn tightly up to the chin, eyes darting between Daniel and the man being dragged away. Every time the suspect shouted, the child flinched, shrinking further into the seat. Daniel stepped closer to the truck, raising a hand to the glass again. The child mirrored it, their palm trembling but steady against the window. "You're safe," Daniel mouthed, holding the gaze until the child's breathing eased slightly. The sergeant of the convoy approached, his face lined with fatigue but his posture firm. "We've got him contained," he said, nodding toward the suspect now shoved into a transport van. "We'll take him back for processing." "But your report?" Daniel cut him off quietly. He wasn't working alone. The sergeant's brow furrowed. "You're sure?" Daniel nodded. His voice was low but resolute. "The whistle. The way he circled us. And the kid," he glanced toward the child, lowering his tone. "They said, 'Don't let him find me.' Not 'don't let them.' Him. Singular. But that whistle? That wasn't him. He was with me when it sounded." The sergeant's jaw tightened. He cursed under his breath. "Which means there's another. Maybe more." Daniel adjusted his rifle strap, scanning the tree again. The mist had begun to thin slightly, but shadows still clung between trunks like stains. "The woods don't feel empty," he muttered. "They feel watched." The sergeant gave a sharp nod, turning to bark orders. "Expand the perimeter. Sweep the east ridge. Double the patrol on the riverbank." Men moved quickly, splitting into teams, beams cutting across the trees like searchlight blades. Daniel stayed at the truck, unwilling to leave the child's side until absolutely necessary. The medic climbed down from the cab, wiping his hands. "Vitals are weak but stable," he reported. "Exhaustion, dehydration, exposure. No major injuries aside from scrapes. But the mental trauma," he shook his head grimly. "That's going to take longer than we can give here." Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes softening as he looked at the child again. "They'll get through it," he said quietly. "They just need to know they're not alone anymore." The medic gave him a look, half questioning, half respectful. "You've done this before, haven't you? Pulled kids out of places they shouldn't have been." Daniel didn't answer. His silence was enough. The memories that flashed in his mind weren't for sharing: villages where laughter had gone silent, doorways where shadows had hidden trembling bodies. The handprints he'd found tonight weren't the first. A shout broke through his thoughts. "Sarge! We've got something!" All eyes swung toward the tree where two men emerged carrying a bundle wrapped in dirty canvas. They laid it out under the floodlight, pulling the cloth back to reveal its contents. Ropes. Dozens of them. Knotted, frayed, some stained dark. The men's faces were pale as they stepped back. "We found it stashed under a lean-to. East side of the ridge. Looks like it's been used." The sergeant's face hardened. He looked at Daniel. "You were right. This isn't one man's operation." Daniel's stomach churned. The ropes weren't just supplies. They were tools. Restraints. Proof that others had been here, and maybe others still were. He turned his gaze back to the child in the truck. Their small hands trembled as they clutched the blanket, eyes flicking toward the bundle of ropes before quickly looking away. They knew what it meant. Daniel crouched beside the door again, his voice gentle. "You're safe now," he repeated. "He won't touch you again." The child's lips moved faintly. "There's more." Daniel leaned closer. "More what?" The child's eyes brimmed with tears. "More kids." The words landed like stones. For a moment, the clearing felt even colder, the mist pressing heavier against their skin. The sergeant swore again, running a hand down his face. "God help us." Daniel stood slowly, his resolve hardening. He slung his rifle back into ready position. "Then we're not done." The sergeant gave him a sharp look. "You're not going back in alone. We move in force. At dawn." Daniel nodded once, though his eyes remained on the tree. "At dawn," he echoed. But deep inside, he knew the forest wouldn't wait until dawn. Whoever else was out there, they had already heard the commotion. They would already be moving. He turned back toward the child one last time before the sweep began. Their hand was still pressed faintly to the glass, as if seeking reassurance. Daniel pressed his own against the window, steady and firm. "We'll find them," he said quietly, a promise as much to himself as to the child. The floodlights hummed, radios crackled, and the suspect's shouts from inside the transport van grew fainter as he was driven away. But Daniel knew the night wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Because a handprint in the mud had led him to one child. And now it had revealed something bigger, a trail that didn't end with one rescue. A trail that might stretch deeper into the woods, darker than anyone wanted to imagine. And Daniel, soldier or not, knew he wouldn't stop until he followed it to the end. The floodlights threw long shadows across the clearing, painting the forest edge in stark contrasts. Men shifted uneasily, their radios crackling as teams checked in from different flanks. The bundle of ropes lay on the ground like a silent accusation, its frayed ends stirring in the breeze. Every man who glanced at it knew what it meant. This wasn't an isolated case. It was systematic. Planned. Daniel stood rigid, boots rooted in the mud, his eyes locked on the tree-line. His body hummed with fatigue, but his mind refused to rest. The child's words repeated over and over, more kids. He wanted to believe the nightmare had ended when he carried that trembling figure out of the trees. But deep down, he knew better. One handprint had led to one child. The ropes suggested a trail far longer, and far darker. The sergeant approached, his expression grave. "We've secured the perimeter." Teams found makeshift camps on the east side, ashes from old fires, tarps strung between trees. Empty now, but fresh enough they were used this week. Daniel's jaw tightened. So he wasn't lying. There are more. The sergeant exhaled slowly, dragging a hand across his weathered face. "We've radioed command. They're sending investigators, child services, the whole damn bureau. But they won't be here until morning." Daniel's gaze flicked toward the child in the truck. They sat slumped against the seat now, eyes half closed, blanket clutched in small fists. Exhaustion was finally winning, but every twitch in their sleep carried the echo of terror. He couldn't shake the image of them whispering, "Don't let him find me." "Morning's too far off," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than anyone. "If there are more kids in those woods, waiting until daylight isn't an option." The sergeant shook his head. "You're running on fumes. You've already pushed past the line. If you go back in now, you'll make mistakes." Daniel's eyes didn't leave the trees. "If I wait, I'll make one bigger." The sergeant studied him a long moment, then cursed under his breath. "Fine. But not alone. 2 men will go with you. Stay within sight of the floodlights. You push past that, and I'll drag you out myself." Daniel gave a curt nod. He didn't argue. He knew the sergeant was right, he couldn't afford reckless moves. But he also knew something the others didn't: the forest wasn't empty. The whistle still rang in his ears, deliberate and taunting. Whoever was out there hadn't fled far. He turned to the truck once more before moving. The child stirred, their eyes fluttering open. They looked at him, confusion and fear mixing in their gaze. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're safe here. Rest now. We're going to make sure no one else is left behind." The child's lips parted as if to speak, but only a faint nod came. They leaned back, eyes slipping shut again, one small hand still pressed faintly against the glass. Daniel adjusted his rifle strap, signaled 2 volunteers, and stepped toward the tree-line. The floodlights cast his shadow long and distorted across the mud. His boots sank with each step, the weight of what he was walking into pressing down heavier than the gear on his back. The forest swallowed him quickly. The noise of the clearing dulled until it was just a faint hum behind him. Ahead, the mist thickened again, curling low, carrying the damp smell of earth and pine. The men behind him moved quietly, flashlights steady, their breaths controlled but quick. They reached the ridge where he'd first spotted the suspect earlier. Daniel crouched, sweeping his beam low. Mud streaks marked the ground, drag lines, heavy boots, smaller scuffs. The forest floor told a story to anyone trained to read it. "Tracks," he whispered. "Multiple. Some smaller." He wasn't working alone. The men exchanged tense glances. One muttered under his breath, "God help us." Daniel followed the line of prints deeper into the trees. They curved north, away from the river, toward thicker growth where the mist clung heavier. Branches snapped under their boots, the only sound besides the occasional drip of water from the canopy. Then, faintly, another sound. A cry. It was distant, muffled, but unmistakable. High-pitched. fragile. The men froze. Daniel raised a hand, signaling silence. They stood still, every ear straining. The cry came again, this time clearer. A child. His pulse surged. He motioned sharply, and they moved in a crouch, flashlights dimmed. The sound led them to a thicket of brush where branches grew tangled tight. The cries were louder now, broken by soft gasps. Daniel pressed forward, parting the branches. His light caught on movement inside, a small figure crouched low, arms wrapped around legs, shivering violently. Another child. Jesus, one of the men whispered. Daniel lowered his rifle instantly, voice soft. Hey there, it's all right. We're here to help. The child flinched at the light, eyes wide, dirt smeared across their face. They looked younger than the first, maybe 6, barefoot, knees scraped raw. Daniel reached slowly, palms open. You're safe now. We'll get you out. The child whimpered, shaking their head. No, he said not to move. Daniel's stomach twisted. Who said that? Before the child could answer, a sound cracked through the forest. A snap of a branch, heavier than any animal. Then, there it was again. The whistle. Low. Piercing. Closer this time. The child screamed, covering their ears. The two men swung their flashlights wildly, beams cutting across trunks. Daniel's heart pounded. The sound wasn't random, it was a signal. Back to the clearing, he barked. He scooped the child into his arms, their small frame trembling against him. Move! They surged through the underbrush, branches whipping against their faces, flashlights bouncing. Behind them, the whistle echoed again, louder now, followed by the faint crunch of pursuit. Daniel's boots pounded mud, lungs burning, but he didn't stop. The floodlights glowed faintly ahead, hazy through the mist. He tightened his grip on the child, whispering fiercely, "Hold on. I've got you." The whistle echoed one last time, so close it seemed to rattle the air around them. And then, the clearing. Floodlights cut the dark apart, voices shouting as the men burst through the treeline. Daniel staggered into the light, lowering the child into the arms of waiting medics. The second child clung desperately, sobbing against the medic's chest. Daniel dropped to one knee, chest heaving, rifle still tight in his grip. His ears rang with the whistle, his mind with one truth. There were more. And whoever was hunting them was still out there. The clearing erupted into controlled chaos as Daniel stumbled out of the treeline with the second child clutched against his chest. Shouts rose from the men as floodlights swung, medics rushing forward with blankets and water. The little one buried their face against Daniel's mud-soaked vest, trembling uncontrollably, their small fists twisted into the fabric. Daniel lowered carefully to one knee, murmuring, "You're safe. It's over. I've got you." But even as the words left his lips, he knew they weren't true. The whistle still echoed in his ears, carried on the mist like a haunting refrain. That sound hadn't just been to taunt him. It had been communication. A signal between hunters. And if 2 children had been found, who knew how many more still hid in these woods? The medic lifted the child from Daniel's arms, cradling them close. The boy, no more than 6, sobbed so hard he could barely breathe. His skin was scraped raw, his feet bleeding from hours spent running barefoot through thorns and mud. The medic shot Daniel a grim look. "He's in bad shape, but he'll live. You pulled him out in time." Daniel wiped mud from his face with the back of his sleeve. His chest still heaved, but his eyes never left the treeline. "It's not just 2, he muttered, voice low, almost to himself. "There are more. There has to be." The convoy sergeant, standing nearby, heard him. "You don't know that." Daniel turned, his expression hard. "Yes, I do. That rope bundle we found wasn't for 1 or 2 kids. Those camps weren't for one night. And those whistles? That wasn't one man signaling himself. That was coordination. The sergeant's jaw tightened. He hated to admit it, but Daniel's instincts had been right so far. And nothing about this night suggested coincidence. Men fanned out again, radios crackling with chatter, beams stabbing into the mist. The forest remained oppressively still, as if holding its breath. Daniel moved back to the trucks, where both children now sat wrapped in blankets, their small bodies dwarfed by the heavy wool. The first child, the one whose handprint had started it all, sat slumped but awake, eyes still flicking nervously toward the trees. The second clung tightly to a medic, every sob shaking their thin frame. Daniel crouched low, meeting their frightened gazes. His voice softened. "You're safe now. You're not alone anymore." The first child whispered faintly, voice rasping. "He's still out there." Daniel swallowed hard. "I know. But he won't reach you again. I promise." The sergeant approached, pulling Daniel aside. "We need to regroup. We'll secure this clearing until daylight, then send in full teams with dogs and heat sensors. We'll tear this forest apart if we have to." Daniel shook his head. "By daylight, it'll be too late. If they've got more kids stashed out there, they'll move them before the sun comes up." That whistle wasn't just to scare us, it was a call. "They're already shifting." The sergeant exhaled sharply, frustration written across his face. "You're running on instinct." Daniel met his gaze firmly. Instinct is what got these two out alive. The argument hung between them, heavy and unspoken. The sergeant knew Daniel was right. But he also knew men were tired, morale fraying, and pushing deeper into the woods at night risked more than they could afford. Before either could say more, a deputy sprinted into the clearing, face pale. "We've got movement," he shouted. South Treeline, figures seen, but they vanished into the mist. Floodlights swung instantly, beams cutting across the south woods. Shadows darted between trunks, quick and deliberate, disappearing before the lights could pin them. Shouts rose, men rushing to secure the perimeter. Daniel's gut twisted. He grabbed his rifle, tightening the strap. "They're probing us. Testing how far they can get to the trucks." The sergeant barked orders. "Hold the line. No one gets through." Daniel moved instinctively to the edge of the clearing, rifle up, eyes sharp. The mist shifted, curling like smoke. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw a face, pale, watching, from behind a tree. But when he blinked, it was gone. Then came another sound. Not a whistle this time. A cry. It carried faintly from the south woods. High-pitched. Fragile. A child. Every man froze. Daniel's chest clenched. He knew that sound. He'd heard too many children cry in too many broken places. It was real. The sergeant cursed, torn. Could be a trap. Daniel's eyes burned into the trees. Or it's another kid. And if we don't move now, we'll never see them again. The clearing buzzed with tension, men gripping rifles tighter, torn between fear and duty. The children in the truck whimpered, covering their ears as the cry echoed again. Daniel turned, locking eyes with the sergeant. "Give me a team. 5 men. I'll lead. We don't wait until dawn. We move now." The sergeant stared at him for a long moment, weighing risks against possibilities. Finally, he nodded, grim and sharp. 5 men. South Treeline. Keep radio contact. If you lose comms, we pull you whether you like it or not. Daniel gave a curt nod. Understood. He turned back once more to the truck. The first child had pressed their palm against the window again, trembling. Daniel raised his hand, steady and firm, against the glass. "I'll be back," he promised softly. "With the others." The child's lips trembled, but they nodded once. Daniel lowered his hand, squared his shoulders, and moved toward the south woods. 5 men fell in behind him, flashlights low, rifles ready. The mist swallowed them quickly, leaving the clearing behind. The cry came again, faint and broken, guiding them deeper. And Daniel knew, as he pushed forward, that the handprint he had first found wasn't just a trail. It was the beginning of a warpath. And tonight, the forest was far from finished. The mist grew denser as Daniel and his 5-man team crossed the south treeline. Floodlights from the clearing faded quickly behind them, swallowed by fog until only a faint glow lingered. Out here, every sound seemed magnified, the crunch of boots, the squeak of damp straps, the occasional snap of branches overhead. But beneath it all was the sound that had drawn them here, the faint cry of a child. Daniel raised a hand, signaling the team to slow. They crouched, rifles angled low, flashlights cutting thin beams through the undergrowth. He motioned 2 men to flank left, 2 right, keeping the formation tight. His eyes scanned constantly, ears tuned for the next cry. There it was again. Weak. Fragile. Ahead, somewhere deeper in the mist. Daniel pressed his lips together, forcing himself to breathe evenly. He knew how sound could play tricks in the woods, especially at night. Echoes stretched, distorted, sometimes even manufactured. But the children he'd already pulled from this forest reminded him one thing: the cries weren't always tricks. Sometimes they were real. He moved forward slowly, boots finding softer ground. Mud clung heavy, and the smell of wet earth and pine filled his nose. His flashlight beam caught faint impressions in the dirt, small scuffs, like bare feet dragging. He crouched, brushing mud with his gloved fingers. Tracks, he whispered. Small. Recent. The men leaned closer, their breaths fogging in the cold air. One swore under his breath. Kids. More of them. Daniel rose, his grip tightening on the rifle. Stay sharp. If we hear that whistle, everyone holds position. Don't chase shadows. They advanced deeper, following the faint trail. The forest closed in, branches clawing at their jackets, the canopy overhead blocking most moonlight. Their flashlights seemed weaker here, beams swallowed by fog within feet. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the occasional cry. Suddenly, the sound of movement. To the right, fast, deliberate. A shadow darting between trees. Contact, one man hissed, raising his rifle. Hold! Daniel snapped sharply. Don't fire. Not unless you see a weapon. The shadow vanished. Silence fell again, thicker than before. The men shifted uneasily, fingers tense on triggers. Daniel's heart pounded. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to escape. They were circling. Watching. Hurting them. Then, the cry again. This time closer. Daniel motioned forward, pushing through brush until they entered a small clearing. In the center, under a leaning pine, was a figure. Small. Curled tightly, arms around knees. Just like before. One of the men whispered, another kid. Daniel moved first, lowering his rifle, flashlight beam steady. It's all right, he said softly. We're here to help. The figure stirred slightly. A small head lifted, hair tangled, face streaked with dirt. Wide, terrified eyes caught the light. It was a child, maybe 7 years old. Their lips trembled as they whispered, "Don't let him take me back." Daniel's chest tightened. He crouched, extending one hand slowly. "You're safe now. Come with us." The child shook their head violently, pointing into the trees with a trembling finger. "He's there." The men swung their flashlights instantly. Beams cut through mist, illuminating trunks and shadows. At first, nothing. Then, movement. A tall figure stood between trees, half hidden in fog. A hood pulled low, body rigid. He didn't move, didn't run. He just stood there, watching. The child whimpered, clutching at Daniel's vest. That's him. Daniel rose slowly, placing himself between the figure and the child. He raised his rifle, voice sharp. Armed forces. Show your hands. The figure didn't respond. He stayed still, head tilted slightly, as though studying them. Hands. Now. Daniel barked again. Nothing. Just silence. Then came the whistle. Sharp. Piercing. So close it made the men flinch. The figure melted back into the mist, vanishing between trees as if the fog had swallowed him whole. Move! Daniel barked. He scooped the child into his arms, clutching them tight. Back to the clearing, now! The team shifted formation instantly, rifles up, flashlights sweeping as they retreated. Every few seconds, shadows flickered at the edges of their beams, always just out of reach, always watching. The whistle echoed again, this time from the left, then the right, bouncing between trees like a taunt. The child clung desperately to Daniel, whispering brokenly into his chest. He said he'll find us. He said he never stops. Daniel's jaw tightened. He pushed harder, boots pounding mud, lungs burning. Not tonight, he whispered back fiercely. Not while I've got you. The glow of floodlights appeared faintly through the mist ahead, distant but steady. Shouts echoed faintly from the clearing, men calling their names, beams swinging in their direction. Then, the sound of pursuit. Heavy footsteps. Multiple. Crashing through brush behind them. Contact rear, one man shouted, spinning to cover. Don't stop. Daniel barked. Keep moving. Flashlights darted wildly, beams catching only flashes of movement. Tall figures weaving between trees, always just beyond reach. The clearing grew closer. The glow brighter. Daniel's chest ached, every muscle screaming, but he didn't slow. The child's sobs pressed against him, small hands gripping his vest like lifelines. Finally, they broke through the tree-line. Floodlights blinded them for a moment as men surged forward, shouting, grabbing the child from Daniel's arms to carry them into safety. Daniel staggered to a halt, gasping for air, sweat mixing with mud on his face. He turned instantly, rifle raised toward the woods. The shadows were gone. The mist hung heavy, empty. The footsteps had stopped the moment they crossed into the light. Only silence remained. The sergeant rushed forward, eyes wide at the sight of another child. God Almighty! How many are out there? Daniel's voice was low, steady despite his exhaustion. More than we thought. And they're not finished. He looked back at the tree-line, where the fog seemed to shift like a living thing. Somewhere in that darkness, the whistle still echoed in his mind. And he knew the night wasn't over. The clearing was no longer just a rescue site, it was a battlefield waiting to happen. Floodlights blazed across the mud, radios buzzed non-stop, and soldiers hustled to and fro with an urgency Daniel hadn't felt in years. The rescued children sat huddled together inside the truck, wrapped in heavy wool blankets, their small bodies shaking despite the warmth. A medic knelt with them, murmuring softly, but their eyes kept drifting toward the tree-line, as if expecting shadows to reach through the light. Daniel stood a few paces away, his rifle slung across his chest, mud streaked up to his knees. His heart was still hammering from the sprint, the child's terrified words echoing in his mind, "He never stops." The sergeant strode toward him, jaw clenched, voice low but urgent. "That's 3 kids you've pulled out now. 3. You realize what that means?" Daniel's eyes didn't leave the forest. "It means we're not looking at an isolated predator. This is a network. Maybe even a camp." The sergeant exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. "We're outnumbered, possibly outmaneuvered. These men, whoever they are, know this forest better than us. We push too deep in the dark, we risk losing men. Hell, we risk losing all of them. Daniel finally turned, his gaze steady. And if we sit here and wait, those kids we haven't found yet vanish. By sunrise, they'll be gone. The sergeant hesitated, torn between protocol and instinct. Daniel pressed on. You saw the tracks. You saw the ropes. You heard those whistles. This isn't random. This is organized. And they won't stop because we lit up a clearing. The sergeant's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of command heavy on him. You think you can lead us in there? You think you can predict where they're moving? Daniel didn't hesitate. I don't think. I know. The sergeant studied him for a long moment, then gave a sharp nod. Fine. You take point. But this time, we bring more than 5. Full squad. And if we lose comms, we pull back. Daniel accepted the terms with a curt nod. His eyes drifted back to the children. The first, the one who had whispered "Don't let him find me," was sitting up straighter now, as though bracing themselves. The second clung to the medic like a lifeline, while the third, the newest rescue, sat quietly but with eyes darting toward every sound. Their silence felt older than their years, like something had already been taken from them. Daniel crouched by the truck, his voice soft. You're safe here. All of you. But I need to ask something important. The children looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. He chose his words carefully, gentle but firm. Are there more? The third child's lips trembled. Slowly, they nodded. The medic's head dropped, and even the sergeant swore under his breath. Daniel pressed gently. Do you know where? The child pointed shakily toward the deeper forest. By the river. A house. Not real house. Wooden, with locks. Daniel's pulse quickened. He looked at the sergeant. There it is. Proof. The sergeant exhaled slowly. All right. We move. Quiet, controlled, and fast. Men loaded fresh magazines, checked radios, and formed into squads. Daniel adjusted his vest, slung his rifle tight, and took position at the head. His body was bruised, muscles screaming, but his mind was razor-focused. He wasn't just following orders now, he was following a promise. As they approached the treeline again, the forest seemed even darker, as though the mist had thickened in defiance of their lights. The floodlights behind them threw their long shadows ahead, stretching like phantoms into the trees. Daniel raised a hand. Stay close. Eyes sharp. They'll know we're coming. The squad moved in, boots crunching softly, flashlights sweeping. Every sound seemed amplified, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. Minutes stretched. Then, faintly, the whistle came again. This time, multiple tones. One long. Two short. Like a code. The squad froze. Daniel's jaw clenched. They're talking to each other. Coordinating. Figures flickered at the edges of beams, always too quick to catch fully. Shadows sliding from trunk to trunk. The men tightened formation, rifles snapping toward every movement. Suddenly, ahead, a faint orange glow. Firelight. Daniel raised a fist, signaling halt. The squad dropped low, rifles steady. He crept forward, every sense sharpened. Through the trees, he saw it, a crude wooden structure, half cabin, half shack, built from rough logs and tarps. Smoke curled faintly from a fire pit out front, embers glowing. Around it, crude crates, ropes, and makeshift cages fashioned from pallets. His stomach twisted. Inside one of the cages, faint movement. Small shapes huddled together. Children. His breath caught. He turned, signaling silently to the sergeant. Pointed. The sergeant's eyes widened, fury flashing across his face. Daniel whispered into his radio. "We've got them. Multiple children alive. Shack near river. Armed hostiles nearby." Before the sergeant could respond, the whistle pierced the air again, this time right above them. Daniel's eyes snapped upward. Shadows shifted in the trees, higher up. Figures moving along branches like predators. Then, the woods erupted. Shouts. Branches snapping. Figures lunging from all sides. The squad opened fire, rifles barking, muzzle flashes strobing the mist. Daniel dropped low, dragging one man back as a figure lunged from the brush with a blade. The forest exploded into chaos, gunfire, screams, shadows darting through beams. Daniel's only thought, the cages. The kids. He pushed forward, cutting through brush, bullets whizzing past. His boots pounded mud as he charged toward the shack. Shadows lunged, but his rifle barked back, each burst driving them off. The children inside the cages screamed, pressing against wooden slats. Their cries cut through the chaos, fueling him with something beyond adrenaline. "Hold the line," the sergeant roared behind him. "Protect the clearing." Daniel didn't stop. He barreled toward the shack, rifle raised, heart hammering, one truth burning inside him. The handprint in the mud had led him here. To this. And he wasn't leaving without every last child. Gunfire shattered the stillness of the forest. Muzzle flashes lit the mist in jagged bursts, each crack echoing through the trees like thunder. Daniel pressed forward, heart hammering, every step aimed toward the shack where terrified children cried out from behind wooden slats. Their voices cut through the chaos, high-pitched, pleading, desperate. He couldn't fail them. Not here. Not now. "Cover him," the sergeant roared behind, barking orders as the squad formed a defensive line. Bullets ripped into the undergrowth where shadows lunged, dark figures flitting between trees with inhuman speed. These men, whoever they were, knew the forest as if it were their own skin. They didn't fight head-on. They struck from above, from the sides, disappearing before a flashlight could pin them. Daniel dove into the mud as a blade flashed past his head, swinging from a figure that dropped from the branches. He rolled, rifle snapping up. The burst lit the figure's face, pale, hooded, eyes wild, before the body dropped into the muck. "Daniel, move," someone shouted. He scrambled to his feet, sprinting the last stretch to the shack. Bullets whipped through the air around him, splinters spraying from the crude wood. He slammed into the door with his shoulder, once, twice. On the third hit, it cracked inward. The smell of rotten smoke hit him, but louder still were the whimpers of children huddled inside. 7 of them. Dirty, malnourished, eyes wide with terror. They shrank against the far wall, arms around each other. Daniel dropped to one knee, lowering his rifle. "It's all right. We're here to take you home. Stay low, stay quiet." A boy, no older than 10, shook his head fiercely. "They'll come back. They always come back." Daniel's voice softened but firm with resolve. "Not tonight. Not while I'm breathing." He rose, yanking his combat knife free. He slashed at the crude locks, the blade cutting rope and splintering wood. One by one, the children crawled free, their thin legs trembling as they stumbled toward him. He ushered them close, shielding them with his body. "Go, go," he barked into his radio. "I've got 7, repeat, 7, coming out." Gunfire intensified outside, shadows striking harder, desperate now. The squad's shouts filled the air, a chorus of defiance against the dark. Daniel herded the children into the night, rifle angled across his chest. The moment they stepped into the open, the whistles started again. Not one. Many. From every direction. High, low, overlapping. The forest itself seemed to scream. The children clutched at him, crying harder, their little bodies trembling. "They're calling," one whispered. "They're calling for each other." Daniel's jaw tightened. He pushed forward. "Keep moving. Don't stop." The sergeant saw them emerge, his face hardening. "Hold the line. Get those kids to the trucks." The squad shifted formation, rifles blazing, carving a narrow corridor of safety. Daniel sprinted through, children stumbling at his sides, soldiers dragging them up when they fell. The whistles grew shriller, almost frantic, like predators desperate to cut off prey. A shadow lunged from the side, blade raised. Daniel swung, his rifle but cracking against the attacker's jaw, dropping him instantly. He didn't stop to look, just shoved the children forward, every muscle burning. The floodlights glowed ahead, faint through the mist. Safety. Almost there. Daniel shouted. "Don't look back, just run." One little girl tripped, sprawling in the mud. Daniel scooped her up without breaking stride, hauling her against his chest. She clung to him, sobbing into his vest. Behind them, gunfire cracked, screams echoing. Men fell, some pulled into the mist. But the line held. The sergeant's voice bellowed, fury and command rolled into one. "Push. Don't give them an inch." The floodlights loomed closer. Trucks, medics, safety. Daniel's legs screamed, lungs burning, but he didn't slow. He carried the girl, guided the others, and burst into the clearing like a man reborn. Cheers erupted. Men surged forward, grabbing children, wrapping them in blankets, hauling them to safety. The cries of terror slowly shifted to cries of relief. Daniel staggered to a halt, collapsing to one knee, the little girl still in his arms. He pressed his forehead against hers, whispering, "You're safe. You're safe now." The sergeant stumbled out of the treeline with the rest of the squad, bloodied but standing. His eyes met Daniel's across the clearing. For a long moment, nothing was said, just the shared weight of survival, of victory pulled from hell. Then the whistles came again. From deep in the woods. Not close, not immediate. But distant. Persistent. A reminder. The sergeant spat into the mud. Cowards ran when they lost their grip. But they'll be back. Daniel rose slowly, handing the girl to a medic. His chest heaved, his clothes soaked, but his eyes were steady. "Then we'll be ready." He turned back toward the children, all 10 of them now, huddled in blankets, pressed against each other for comfort. Their eyes were wide, haunted, but alive. And that was enough for tonight. Daniel knelt in front of them, voice low and steady. "You're safe. No one will ever take you back there again." A boy, the oldest, studied him with cautious eyes. "You promise?" Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "I promise." The whistles faded, swallowed by distance, but Daniel knew they weren't gone. The forest would never be quiet again, not for him. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of branches would carry the memory of this night. But as he watched the children cling to each other, alive and breathing, he also knew the truth. The handprint in the mud hadn't just marked the start of a trail. It had marked the beginning of a vow. One he would keep until his last breath.